Hey guys, Pastor Brody here. Just wanted to let you know that our leadership team has been praying that God would use this sermon to help build you up into the image of His Son, Jesus Christ, and that He would do that in conjunction with the local church. So if you're here in the area, why don't you stop by this weekend? Why don't you see us in person and really get connected to what God is doing here? If you're not here, we pray the same for where you are. Get connected to your local church. We think that's one of the best things that you can do. Thanks so much for watching this, and I pray that it blesses you. Can't do much if I don't unmute myself or don't bring my sermon notes. So good to see you guys today. My name is Brody. I'm the pastor here at Gateway Church. It's so good to see our college students back. We were at Valley Ballyhoo over at Western yesterday and got to meet a lot of you, so welcome. We're going to continue today in our series in the book of Ruth, and we've been chasing this idea of faithfulness. What does it mean? How do you play out a life of faithfulness? And if you're newer here, if you have not been to a Wayfinder yet, I just want to make a quick invitation. I would love to invite you to Wayfinder next week. Okay, next Sunday after the service, we're going to feed you a meal, college students. We're going to feed you a meal, okay? And this is your way of taking your next step of connection and commitment here at Gateway Church. Guys, you were created for community. We were created to help. So next week at Wayfinder, you're going to find out everything you need to know about us. You're going to find out what God has in store for us, what we're praying that God has in store for us, and how you can really be involved. So I would encourage you to go sign up for that. We need to know how many people are coming just to be able to provide enough food. So be sure to go online and sign up for that so that we can be ready for you next week. Go ahead and open up with me to Ruth chapter 3. That's where we're going to be. That's in the Old Testament of the Bible, and it's right between the books of Judges and 1 Samuel. So if you're looking for it, it's right in there. It's going to be on the screen too, so you can look at that. But before I got into ministry, I worked for Enterprise Rent-A-Car. So we'll pick you up, right? Enterprise Rent-A-Car. I worked with them for 4 years. And that's ultimately how Maddie and I moved to Greensboro and how we got connected to our sending church, Mercy Hill. But Enterprise is all about customer service, okay? There were 9 values that we had as a company, and those were drilled into you from day one. And anytime that you were going for a promotion, you had to recite those from memory, those 9 values. Here's one of them. Personal honesty and integrity are the foundation of our success. I love that. It's such a Christian value in a secular world. But here's the problem. Even though that was our value, not everyone adhered to it. Enterprise was a competitive work environment. Everyone was trying to get ahead. Everyone was trying to get the promotion over the next person. It wasn't you before me. It was me before you. As managers, we were graded on everything, every dollar, every cent, graded on it all. And that was really what was responsible for getting you promoted, either promoted to a bigger branch or ultimately promoted to customer, if you know what I mean there. One day, after monthly numbers came out, there was another branch in my area that had the highest daily rate for insurance rentals in the entire country. Like he just blew it out of the water. It was crazy. It was an outrageous feat. He got shortlisted for some promotions. He got invited to talk to other branch managers so that he could kind of share his secrets of how they were doing things there. But something was a little fishy. Something didn't seem right. So what I did is I thought I would look into it. I went to his previous months, all his closed tickets from that month, and I found out that he had overcharged every single customer, the highest that he could overcharge them. And then he wrote off all of that money on the back end. So he was committing fraud. He was charging this high rate, and that difference of what customers were supposed to pay, he was just writing off, just sending it into nowhere. Honesty and integrity are the foundations of our success. So I reported him to our boss. And guess what happened? Nothing. It's an all too common occurrence in our dog-eat-dog world. Everyone trying to get ahead, everyone trying to keep up with the Joneses or the Kardashians or the Stallones I've seen now. Everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes. We're living in the time of Judges. No one seems to be looking out for others. No one is serving others first. But Ruth chapter 3 is such a refreshing reminder of faithful service to others, of putting you before me. Here's our main idea for today. God shows us the faithful way of serving others first. That's what we're going to see. And I know we have some new people here today, so let me just kind of recap a little bit the book of Ruth so that we're all kind of on the same page. In chapter 1, we meet Ruth, our title character. Ruth is the daughter-in-law of Naomi. Naomi and her husband and her 2 sons, they left Israel, they left Bethlehem to go to a foreign country, a foreign land, to Moab, because there was a famine in the land. And when they were away in Moab, her 2 sons married 2 Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. And over the span of 10 years, Naomi's husband and 2 sons die. So everyone is left as a widow. Naomi heard that the famine was over in her homeland, and so she decided that, hey, I'm going to go back. There's this little spark of hope, and I'm going to go back to my homeland. And she told her 2 daughters-in-law to go back to their families, to go back to their homeland, to go back to their the place where they were going to be secure and accepted, and that she would return back to Bethlehem alone. And Orpah kissed Ruth, or kissed Naomi and left, but Ruth clung. She told Naomi that where she goes, I'll go. Your people, they're my people. Your God is my God. And so they returned back to Bethlehem completely empty. And then chapter 2, Ruth, she goes out into the fields to glean. It was a practice that that allowed for poor people, for outsiders to come in and to have a sustenance to be able to provide for their family. It wasn't going to get them further in life, but it was going to be able to sustain them. So she goes out into the fields to glean and to hopefully be able to provide for her and Naomi. And she just happened to come upon a field of this man named Boaz. But both Boaz and Ruth show this amazing faithfulness throughout the entire book. But in chapter 2, Boaz goes above and beyond anything ever called, anything ever required of him in the law. He goes above and beyond. And Naomi realizes that Boaz is one of her family's redeemers. He would potentially be able to marry Ruth and to provide the family posterity for through more children, to give the family hope and a future. And that's where we pick up here in chapter 3. This chapter, it really relates the climactic turning point of the entire story. Indeed, there's no higher level of dramatic tension than in this chapter. There's a ton of suspense. The provision of food in chapter 2 ended their famine as a family. But now Ruth's widowhood would be ended, would near its end. The narrator here, his cleverness, it takes some surprising turns. He shrouds the story in darkness. There's mystery, there's intrigue. Unlike earlier events, these take place in the dead of night and in utmost secrecy. Darkness, it blacks out the whole background of everything that's happening as if it's just illuminating the 2 main characters. And pay attention, too, to the timing of these events. Naomi, she's going to devise her plan in the evening. Ruth, she makes her move around midnight. And then Boaz's provision and Naomi's evaluation of things that happen just happened the next morning. So the first 2 chapters span decades. And then chapter 3 is just hours. It's like in a play, you know, when an important scene is happening, the stage lights kind of dim and it's just the spotlight on the main character. And even the background characters, they kind of like slow down as if time is slowing down, but yet the main characters are still acting. That's what's happening here. So I've broken the text up to three scenes, okay? We're going to look at those three scenes. We're going to look at the scheme, the plan that Naomi has. We're going to look at the execution of that plan, and then we're going to look at the results. So follow along with me as I read Ruth chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he's winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." So this is the scheme, okay? A couple really important things here. Naomi is looking out for her daughter-in-law. She knows that gleaning from the fields is only a temporary solution. It's a precarious life. One day, Boaz may be gone. One day, Ruth may be too old to sustain herself in this type of living. This subsistence living would bring no rest to Ruth all of the days of her life. So we see here that Naomi cares for Ruth. She says, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you? Should I not see you settled in life? Should I not help you find something better?" Ruth, she needs a more sustainable future. She needs security. She needs rest. And Naomi tells Ruth that night, Boaz will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. So in this process, the grain was separated from the husks by being trodden out by animals. And then the mixture was thrown into the air against a stiff breeze, and more or less the grain fell down and the chaff was just blown away. So this was just part of the process of farming in those days. And she knew that this would be happening. And Naomi comes up with this weird plan, okay? It is weird. Wait till he's dead tired. Wait till he has a full belly. Wait till he's fallen asleep. And then go uncover his feet. This is one of those spots in the Bible where we need to realize that we're reading a description of what happened and not a prescription of what to do, okay? College students, do you hear me? Ladies, please do not go uncovering the feet of any man in the dead of night. One, feet are nasty. And two, it's just not good advice, okay? This is not how you find a mate. But this is one of those long-lost customs that we just don't understand. It was probably signifying to Boaz that Ruth was ready to kind of take off of her mourning clothes. And that's why Ruth was telling her to change her clothes, to go get washed. And that she was ready and wanting him to marry her. But here's the cool thing that we see again in this book. This is something that we see in every chapter. We see that even though that the book of Ruth highlights the providence of God, how God is at work in the lives of his people, the characters here, they don't slip into a passive fatalism. They're active. They're not disengaged. Naomi does not say, "Hey, God is sovereign, okay? He's in charge, so let's just wait until a husband knocks on the door." No, God's sovereignty is not a license for human inactivity. That would be not trusting the Lord, but testing the Lord. And Ruth responds, "All that you say, I will do." Faithful Ruth, obediently trusting and taking a huge risk. I mean, going alone to a man in the dead of night. If she's seen, she will be shamed. If he's not good, she will be harmed. But she trusts that her mother-in-law is working for her good. She trusts that her mother-in-law is working for her rest. And she trusts her mother-in-law. And ultimately, she trusts her God. What can we take away from this little scene, right? I think knowing that just because God is in charge doesn't mean that we don't act is a good thing to take away. God is in charge and we act. Those are not mutually exclusive statements. Naomi models for us one way in which divine and human actions work together. Believers are not to wait around passively for things to happen. Rather, they must seize the initiative when an opportunity presents itself, knowing that God is the one who presents the opportunity. And let me just give you a quick example of that. So last year, as we were getting started, before we got started, we had this hope as a church to be able to have residents, to have this whole residency program. And we were thinking like, okay, that'll be in the future, right? We got to get started. And then we'll find some people who want to be residents, and we'll kind of build them up and bring them into that. But then Olivia. Olivia was going to be a resident at another church, at the church that she went to in college. And kind of 3 days right before she was set to move to go start her master's program and to become a resident at her college church, the church called her and said, hey, we just can't do it. 3 days before she was supposed to leave. And Olivia did something that she told me she's never really done before. She went and sought out someone who was older and wiser than her to help her understand this experience and what she needs to do. She hadn't done that before. She hadn't opened up in that way. She hadn't taken that risk of letting people in that way. And then that person said to me, hey, this just happened to Olivia. And then I was like, well, maybe she could be our resident. And in the span of like 3 days, literally, we created this whole residency. And Olivia is now our first resident. Next week, I get to introduce you to our second resident. And it's just an amazing thing to see that acting in faith, taking a risk, looking at those even obstacles, those opportunities that God has presented to you, to act in faith, to be faithful, that's what Naomi and Ruth are doing. The same is true for us as Christian believers. As we make plans, as we try to figure out strategies in ministry and make good decisions in our lives about where to live and what to do and even how to serve God, we are called to live in such a way that everything depends on the kindness, on the integrity, and on the redeeming power of King Jesus. To the extent that we know and we trust him, we will take risks to live for him. We will take risks to further his kingdom. When we hold back, when we play it safe, we are often betraying a small view of Jesus. We're often saying, God, I know what you said, and I know who you are, but I don't really trust you. A suspicion that deep down that he may not come through for us, that he cannot be trusted to do what is best for us. Faithful men and faithful women of God act and take risks, knowing that they are fully dependent on Jesus for the opportunity, for the execution, and for the results. And this crazy, weird plan that Naomi cooks up all depends on Boaz. So let's see what happens. Verse 6. So she went down to the threshing floor, that's Ruth, and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said to her, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, and that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning." So this is the execution of the plan. Remember what is happening here, okay? This is a servant demanding that her boss marry her. This is a Moabite, an outsider, making the demand of an Israelite. This is a woman making the demand of a man. This is a poor person making the demand of a rich man. What is she doing? Is this an act of a naive foreigner? Is she just stepping out in this silly plan that her mother-in-law has cooked up? We all know mother-in-laws can be a little crazy. But not mine. Or was this a daughter-in-law's devotion to her mother-in-law? Or maybe, was this just another sign of the hidden hand of God? From a human perspective, this scheme was doomed. From the beginning of the whole process, it was doomed to be a hopeless gamble. And the responsibility Naomi placed on Ruth was quite unreasonable. But guess what? It worked. And did you catch how the language changed midway through? It went, the author went from talking about Ruth and Boaz, Ruth and Boaz, Ruth and Boaz, to the man and the woman. And I feel like this is just one of those like little breadcrumbs that the author is giving us to make us think back to another man and woman. Back to the Garden of Eden. Back to a time when there was this promise of a seed, a promise of an offspring that would come and crush the head of the serpent. And the author's putting you back in this perspective because he's laying this little breadcrumb for what's about to happen in chapter 4. When the promised seed, the line of the seed, continues. And Ruth, she gives this bold demand that Boaz spread the wing of his garment over her. This is a symbolic way of saying, marry me. A similar metaphor is found in Ezekiel chapter 18. You can write that down and go take a look. But God is entering into a marriage covenant with Jerusalem by spreading the wing of his garment over the young woman who symbolized Jerusalem and Israel. Ruth's demand receives added significance when you remember Boaz's earlier prayer that the God of Israel, whose wings now provided Ruth with refuge, would richly reward her for what she has done. That was back in Ruth chapter 2, verse 12. It's just like these layers upon layers upon layers. It is a truly beautiful image of provision and protection. But we need to talk a little bit about the sensuality of the story. The seductiveness in the story will make some uncomfortable, but this very tension is important because it highlights the purity of both Ruth and Boaz. Other Old Testament stories in similar settings led to sexual immorality. You think about Lot and his daughters. You think about Noah and his daughters. You think about Judah and Tamar. But both Ruth and Boaz, they give us a much-needed example of godliness, of faithfulness in the time of Judges, in a time when everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes. The ambiguity here and the suggestive language, they serve two purposes. First, they easily retain the audience's attention, okay? And gripping suspense, too. This is a great short story. This is a beautiful love story. But second, they thrust Ruth and Boaz into this crucible of moral choice. Will they again, as before, live faithfully? Or will this be their downfall? Will they live according to God's standard? Or will they sin? And they don't. Naomi's crazy plan works because of the faithfulness of Ruth and Boaz. To be awakened by the presence of a woman in the middle of the night may cause a weaker man to succumb to temptation, but not Boaz. Boaz is amazing, truly. I mean, most of you in here today can't even refrain from scratching your poison ivy when it itches. But Boaz knows how to control his urges because he has submitted his body to the Lord, which is his spiritual worship. Boaz goes on to tell Ruth to remain with him during the night for the purpose of security. She has already risked so much in coming to him, risk being seen by someone, risk being pointed out and shamed, that for her to be in danger on the way back to Naomi's was foolish. Don't leave in the middle of the night. Don't risk what you've risked already. Stay here, be safe, and in the morning you can go. In verse 14. So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another, and he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out." So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. And then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" She replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." So these are the results here. This is the last part of chapter 3, setting you up for chapter 4 and the thing that's about to happen, because there's a redeemer that's closer than Boaz, and there's this tension even there. But when Ruth returns, Naomi is eager to hear about Ruth's status. You know, the text that we read today says, "How did you fare, my daughter?" That's not the literal translation. The literal translation, she actually asks, "Who are you, my daughter?" The same question that Boaz asked her earlier in the chapter. Of course, Naomi knows who Ruth is. What she wants to know is, are you still a Moabite widow? Or are you a bride to be? Has your status changed? Naomi's asking, did the plan work? Are you going to be his wife? Is everything going to turn around for us? This is the 3rd time in the book that her identity has been questioned. First, she was a Moabite, a foreigner, an outcast. That's Boaz asking in chapter 2, who is this woman in my fields? And the guy that works for him is like, well, she's the Moabite that you've heard about. And then in verse 9 today, Boaz asks her, who are you? She says, "I'm your servant." But finally, with dowry in tow, she can show her mother-in-law that her identity is continuing to improve. She basically says, "I'm his fiance. Not married yet, that comes tomorrow. But let me show you this ring that he gave me. All this grain." How similar is this to the way that Jesus has dealt with us? We can be like Ruth, going to him respectfully but boldly to ask him to spread his wings. Spread his wings over us and redeem us. He has made a promise that all who call on his name will become a part of his bride, will become a part of the church. And he has given us the most wonderful provision, not grain, but the Holy Spirit, who dwells in us as the first fruits, which promises more to come and assuring us of the redemption of our bodies. When we come to Christ, we too can ask for the redemption and the provision that we are desperate for. Jesus has already seen us in our need, helpless at his feet, and he has paid the price for us. Our Redeemer, he has changed everything. He has changed our status. He has brought us into an intimate union with himself, and he has given us a glorious hope for the future. So let me ask you, who are you? Are you a Moabite? Are you an outsider? Maybe you're here today and you're curious. You're like, what is this church thing? Why do they even do church? Or maybe you have some intrigue about Jesus. You're curious, and he seems like a cool guy, but a lot of his so-called people seem really off. But you're still curious about him. Listen, I'll be the first to admit to you that we do not have it all together. But I think if you take a long look in the mirror and you truly answer that question, who am I? You might see that you're on the outside looking in. After answering that, asking who am I, maybe the next most important question to answer is, who is Jesus? Because if he is who he says he is, then your world is about to change forever. Maybe you're not an outsider, but maybe you're acting like a servant, trying to earn your way to God. If I had to guess, I'd say there are a lot of people in the room that are just like this. You know God, but more like a demanding boss than a loving father. You have this need to continually prove yourself. You have this debtor's ethic of I need to earn my way to him. Continually work to make sure that you've done all the good things and not the bad, or at least more good than bad, more positives than negatives. You feel like there's this eternal scale. And as long as you can just make it balance with enough good, then you're going to be okay. You'll be able to save yourself. You'll be able to improve your status yourself. This is what I like to call Southern fried religion. This is the religion of the South, a works-based religion, just like the rest of the world, with just a little bit of Jesus added in. That's not Christianity. That's not the gospel. The gospel is that you, in your sin, your wrongdoings, your ungodliness, your lapses in judgments, your profane living, and all of those things, you are dead. Spiritually dead and eternally separated from God. There might be an eternal weights and balances, but it's all the way in one direction. And you could never do enough to raise it up even a millimeter. You need someone who lived a perfect life that you could never live and offered up that perfect life in your place. Someone who took on the wrath for sin. Someone who did everything necessary to save you from the clutches of sin and death. Someone to spread his wing over you. You need Jesus. If you are an outsider or a servant trying to earn your way, you need to trust in him fully. You need to take the risk of shame and humiliation to truly be changed. You need to believe that Jesus has done everything necessary for salvation. And then you need to follow him by taking your first step of obedience and being baptized. And we're doing that on our 1-year anniversary, September 17th. If that's the step that you need to take, you can go online and fill out the info form there. You can fill out one of the cards here and drop it off in the box on your way out. But you need to take that step. That's the first step of obedience for any new follower of Christ. But if you're not an outsider looking in, or you're not a servant trying to earn your way, then guess what? You are his bride. And if you are his bride, then you know that this crazy thing has happened. Since your status has changed, since you're not an outsider, since you're not a servant, and you are now a bride, you are now able to turn around and be a servant to outsiders from a whole new motivation. You're not serving to earn, but serving to give. You're putting others before yourself. And here's how we say that here. You're serving others first. Chapter 3 of the book of Ruth displays 3 believers acting on the behalf of others, even when there is no obligation to do so. Naomi has no obligation or duty to find Ruth a husband. She's being provided for. She can sit back and relax, but she doesn't. Ruth has no obligation or duty to follow Naomi's plan. She runs a number of risks in realizing the plan. Again, one misrepresentation, one misplaced word could undo all of the good that has developed over the last 2 months. She could just do nothing, but she doesn't. She obeys. And finally, Boaz. He's not obligated to respond in the way that he does. There are risks for him too, but in all 3 individuals, we see models of decisive action in doing what is right. We see each person serving others first. Now listen, if you've been around Gateway, if you're starting to call Gateway Church home, one of the best ways in this season that you can serve others first here at Gateway is to serve in kids. This kind of growth that we're experiencing, it creates a number of problems, a lot of good problems, a lot of good opportunities. And one of those is we had to kind of go down from being able to watch kids all the way up to 4th grade to just being able to watch rising kindergartners and earlier, younger, something like that. But we would love to open up a second classroom. But there's a bottleneck. We have the kids, but we don't have the volunteers. Hey, maybe it's just for a season. But maybe for this season, you could serve others first in that way. of being able to serve in kids. And that would truly open up some new opportunities, some new seats for some more people to come in, for some more people to feel welcome. Maybe you can think back to your first Sunday here and how you felt welcomed, how you felt like other people were looking out for you, how you felt like it was really others before the people who were already here. And that's something we want to continue. That's something we want to see last for a long time, of serving others first. One of the best ways to kind of do that is if you haven't been to Wayfinder, come to Wayfinder, because we'll kind of help you take that next step of connection and commitment and just see where you can kind of fit in. So I would encourage you again to go sign up for Wayfinder if you haven't done that. If you've already been to Wayfinder, if you've already gone through that, or if you're just looking to serve or maybe get back into serving, I would say shoot me an email, and we'll be sure to work all those things out in the next couple weeks. It's one of the things about chapter 3 that maybe gets misunderstood is why didn't Boaz just reach out to her? Why didn't Boaz just go after Ruth? Why did Ruth have to do all this? Why did Naomi have to come up with a crazy plan? And you see that in the chapter that Boaz. I'll read it again just to refresh our memories. In verse 10, he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." Boaz gives the reason. It's age. Ruth is younger than he is. And in his faithfulness, he is not going to presume anything. He is faithful through it all. And when we look through Boaz, we get to Christ. He is faithful, faithful, faithful. Even when we're faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. Who is like our God? No one. Let me pray. God, you are so good. And Lord, you invite us even to act in faith, to take risks, to take big risks, depending on you, depending on the one to come up with the plan, to help us through the execution, and we're dependent on you for the results. Lord, I have no idea how that filter applies to people today in particular situations, or maybe it's school, maybe it's family, maybe it's life, maybe it's jobs, maybe it's a myriad of things. But Lord, I know that in those you call us into a closer relationship with you, to trust you. Because ultimately you have done everything necessary to save us. You have spread your wings over us to redeem us. So we praise you, Lord. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.